This is section B of the pre-trip inspection. We'll start with our multifunctional light. Multifunctional light serves as a left and right turn signal, four-way flasher, and a marker light. Should be amber in color because it's at the front of the truck. Clean, clear, not cracked, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. This is our mirror and mirror mount. It's not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. The glass is clean, clear, not cracked, has no illegal stickers, should be properly mounted and secure. We have our door. Our door has no holes or dents, no illegal welds, not bent, broke, or cracked, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws. It should be properly mounted and secure, and the door opens and closes properly. This is our door handle. It's not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. And it's properly mounted and secure, and the door opens, closes properly. We have our door seal. Door seal has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not leaking, and it's properly mounted and secure. We have our door hinges. Not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. They're properly mounted and secure. And the door opens and closes properly. We have our DEF fuel tank with cap. It's not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. Should be filled to the proper level. Has a rubber seal inside that has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. Properly mounted and secure. We have our steps. Steps not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. They're properly mounted and secure, and they can support my weight. We have our fuel tanks with two metal straps with rubber linings. The rubber lining is to prevent metal on metal contact. Rubber lining also has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They're not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. They're properly mounted and secure. We have our fuel cap. It's not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It has a safety chain and a T-bar inside with the rubber seal. The rubber seal has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It's not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not leaking, and they're properly mounted and secure. Alright, as we come to the back, we have our L-shaped reflective DOT tape, clean, clear, and not cracked. It's properly mounted and secure, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. We have our exhaust. Our exhaust has no soot trails, which will indicate a leak. Not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. We have our drive shaft. Drive shaft, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. It's not twisted. It should be free of debris. We have our catwalk and catwalk steps. Catwalk, not bent, broke, or cracked, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. It's properly mounted and secure, and it can support my weight. We have our catwalk steps, not bent, broke, or cracked, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, and it also can support my weight. Alright. We have our tractor frame. The frame, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. They properly mounted and secure. We have airbags and shocks. Our airbags has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Airbag mount, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. They properly mounted and secure. The shocks, not leaking, properly mounted and secure to the truck frame, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. Alright. We have our torque arm. A torque arm, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. Properly mounted and secure. Let's see what else. Let's go to the brake system. We also have our cross member, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked, properly mounted and secure. Brakes, we'll start with the brake hoses. This is the brake hoses, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked, has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not leaking, properly mounted and secure. Our brake chamber. Chambers off in there. Not bent, broke, or cracked. Not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. It's properly mounted and secure. In the back of the brake chamber, you have the slack adjuster and push rod. Slack adjuster and push rod should only have no more than 1 inch of play with the brakes released. They're not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. Alright. We have our brake drum inside the tire. The brake drum has no holes or dents, no illegal welding, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. Alright, we have our brake linings, which is also inside the tire. The brake linings should be free of grease and debris, should only have no more than 1/4 inch of friction material at its thinnest point, properly mounted and secure. Alright, now we want to move to our suspension. Our suspension, back here we have our spring mount. Spring mount, not bent, broke, or cracked, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, has no missing or damaged bushings inside. We also have the leaf springs. The leaf springs, not scissoring or has not shifted, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. Alright, this is a U-bolt. The U-bolt is not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. We also have our shock. Our shock is properly mounted and secure to the truck frame, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's not leaking. Alright. Right here, this is our splash guard. The splash guard, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. It's properly mounted and secure. Has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Alright, I want to talk about our tires. Our tires, these tires are butted up against each other. This is the bud space in between to keep the tires from touching. The bud space should be centered, should be free of debris, should be properly mounted and secure, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. Our tire. These tires are 232 seconds. These tires can be recapped. Should be filled to 100 psi or whatever the manufacturer specifies. Tires are evenly worn. It's not leaking. Has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Properly mounted and secure. We have our rim. Our rim has no illegal welding. They're not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked, and it's properly mounted and secure. We have our lug nuts. Lug nuts has no shiny rust trails, which will indicate looseness, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked. They're properly mounted and secure. We have our hub or axle seal. It's not leaking, should be filled to the proper level, not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked, properly mounted and secure. We have our valve stem wick cap. Valve stem wick cap, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws, not bent, broke, or cracked, not leaking. Alright, so this is axle 2. The same way I explained axle 2, I can explain axle 3. And we can skip axle 3 and go to the mud flap. The mud flap should be 8 inches off the ground. It has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Not missing any nuts, bolts, or screws. It's properly mounted and secure. Also have DOT reflective tape. Should be red and white in color. 100% across the back. Clean, clear, not cracked. Properly mounted and secure. Alright, we have our tail light assembly. We got a driver side and a passenger side. Both has a left and right turn signal, 4-way flasher, marker lights, and brake lights. It's red in color, clean, clear, not cracked, properly mounted and secure. And also the clear lights are your reverse lights. They clean, clear, not cracked, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws. They're properly mounted and secure. Multifunctional lights. Alright. Also, on the back right here, we forgot to mention our airbags and airbag mounts. The airbag has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws. They're properly mounted and secure. The mount, not missing nuts, bolts, or screws. Properly mounted and secure. It's not leaking. Alright. Also, you got to indicate from the back of the tractor to the landing gear, you have enough space to make proper turns. And that completes Pretrip B.